Hey everyone, and welcome back. So, it's been about 5 days that we got the big Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, and so much has happened that I decided to make a video. We're gonna sort of put it all together: the good, the bad, and the weird that is happening with the Nintendo Switch 2 launch. Now, just before we jump in, I want to be very clear. I'm super hyped and very excited about the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, and overall, I was very positive after the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. But I do think that it's important to not only look at the good, but also clearly state what are some of the down points that happened, especially following that Direct. And also in the weird section, it's mostly Nintendo being Nintendo, but there's also a few questions that need answering, and it's sort of weird that they haven't talked about it yet, or they haven't just made the information public. Anyway, don't forget that if you are liking the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you aren't already. But now let's jump in to the good, the bad, and the weird. Hey everyone, this is Future Rick. So just before we jump into the video, I did want to mention the situation is evolving so quickly that there actually are a couple of things or extra information that came out in between when I recorded the video and when I edited it. Now, it wasn't enough to re-record the whole video, but you will see some extra information pop up from time to time to add more precision to some of the points I'm making verbally. So anyway, that was pretty much it. Now enjoy the video. Now, if we start on a positive note, I think there's no better place to start than the games. The games were looking amazing all throughout the Direct, and I'll be honest, I was actually surprised by how many games we actually got to see. Now, we're not going to be looking at all the games that were announced, but especially those that I really think left a mark, at least for me. And the best place to start is the first party games and Mario Kart World. Look, the game looks amazing. Not only that, but now we get to play with up to 24 racers at once. And finally, Nintendo has jumped into the new century, allowing for online communication in a very easy and straightforward fashion. But we'll talk about that in its own section. And I've got to say, I was surprised because when I first saw this game, I just thought it was going to be another Mario Kart with extra racers. But the more footage I've seen over the week, the more this game looks better and better each time we get more information about it. It's become an open world game, and there's even a ton of new features added onto the gameplay, like the knockout racing mode, and probably a ton more that we haven't even heard about yet. And I'm extremely excited here because Mario Kart 8 was probably the game I played the most of all throughout the Switch's life cycle. I mean, every week, I would have a weekly session with my family where we would pop the game in and do a couple of races. I really can't say that about a lot of games. Now, moving on next, we also saw that Metroid Prime 4 and Pokemon will have separate Nintendo Switch 2 upgraded versions. Now, I am super excited about these games, but they're not my biggest excitement moment. The main reason why is because these are cross-generational games, and I'm sure the Switch 2 versions will be a significant upgrade over the base game, but at heart, they aren't pure Nintendo Switch 2 games. That being said, I'm probably going to be playing Metroid Prime 4 as soon as it releases, and I'm probably not going to put down the controller till the game is done. On the other hand, Pokemon looks a lot better in the Nintendo Switch 2 footage, but they've still got a long way to go to convince me that I really want to jump deeply into another Pokemon game, especially after the last two not being bad, but being sort of like ho-hum. But what definitely took the cake for me in first-party games is Donkey Kong Bonanza. Look, I've been waiting for a new 3D Donkey Kong game for a long time, but not only that, a 3D Donkey Kong game that looks like it knows what it wants to be and actually feels like a fresh take on the gameplay. And I think that sums up perfectly what we've seen so far of Donkey Kong Bonanza. Once again, every bit of footage that gets added online, the game looks better and better each and every time. But overall, I think the biggest exciting point about the games is when we finally saw the third-party games, because it finally looks like we're back to parity with the other platforms. What I mean by that is we seem to finally be getting those next gen games that the Switch just couldn't handle anymore. And at least for the next few years, probably every major cross platform release is finally going to be getting a Switch version that runs well. Now, obviously, the biggest hitters in this section, at least for me, was Silk Song, which finally should be releasing in 2025. Elden Ring, which is probably one of the best games to release in the last 10 years, and we'll finally be able to play it on a Nintendo portable platform. And Street Fighter 6, which honestly I've played a ton of on the PS5, and I really can't wait to have access to it as well in a mobile format. But what definitely blew my socks off in this section is the fact that in 2026, we are getting a brand new game from FromSoft called Duskbloods. And not only that, it's going to be a Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive. So yes, the quality of the games is definitely a big part of what seems to be very good about this Nintendo Switch 2 release. Now, I can already hear you typing, don't worry, we're going to be talking about the games again in the bad section from a different perspective. But first, let's wrap up the good section. And next, I want to talk about the mouse function. And I think that this is an understated new ability that the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be offering. I don't think people realize yet just how big this function is going to be. Not only just for gimmicks, because you know that wheelchair game, it looked fine, but that's not what's getting me hyped about the mouse functionality. I think that the Nintendo Switch 2 is finally going to be the go-to console for a bunch of gameplay genres that really always felt a little bit weird on consoles. Number one, RTSs. It's one of my favorite type of games. We just don't have them on consoles generally because they're very hard to port over without a mouse compatibility. Imagine playing a new Command & Conquer title. Imagine getting ports of the old Command & Conquer titles. Imagine Warcraft. Who knows? The sky is the limit, but we could finally get RTS games that work very well on a console. Secondly, we've got simulation and city builders. The 2 Point series is one of my favorite series, and although I've played a ton of it on the Switch, I've got to say, when I played on a computer, it does just feel better. Now, we're finally going to bridge both worlds together, and it's going to feel just as good on the Nintendo Switch. We also have point-and-click games that already function pretty well. It's just going to be a whole new and better dimension. And lastly, FPS games. I think that the Nintendo Switch 2 just might become the console of choice for people who don't want to game on a PC and really play those online games like Marvel Rivals, which hopefully is going to get a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, or Fortnite. Look, if you like those online shooters, I think the Nintendo Switch 2 as a console is going to be offering one of the best experiences thanks to that new functionality. And maybe last to wrap this up, wait till the third-party companies come in with actual mouse accessories. The Joy-Cons are probably going to feel a little weird for some games, but you know what? Now with that functionality in there, most likely we're going to get full-blown mice that are going to be compatible with your Nintendo Switch 2. Now the next point I think goes without saying, but I'm really glad that they stuck to the basic formula of having handheld, tabletop, and docked mode all available in one console, and basically they didn't mess with a winning formula. To me, that is a definite good point here. I was worried that Nintendo was going to go too far off the reservation and basically forget that that's what actually made the Nintendo Switch 1 one of the most successful consoles of all time. So I would say good job, Nintendo, you reined it in. And while we're on the subject of the dock, as everyone was asking for, we finally do have 4K compatibility confirmed in docked mode. And although I personally didn't absolutely need that 4K, I'm still glad it's there. I'm also really glad that they seem to be putting into a lot of games the choice between a quality and a performance mode, meaning that if you're willing to forgo the 4K and get a better refresh rate, well, you can sort of opt for that as well. Next, I'm glad that they also added in and focused on that second USB plug and that it's not only for charging your Switch. So yes, that's a positive. When you're in tabletop mode, you can charge it from the top because it was a hassle trying to charge your Switch from the bottom. However, you can also plug in a camera accessory. And personally, I think this is only the beginning. I do think more accessories will become available in a certain amount of time, and they'll probably be unveiled a little bit later. Now, I am hoping that this is compatible with any USB-C camera, but that's definitely something I'm going to be testing out as soon as I get my hands on the Nintendo Switch 2. I have multiple USB-C cameras in the studio, so I'll be plugging a few in and seeing if they work. Hopefully, you don't absolutely have to buy the Nintendo camera. And that brings us to our last point, is that famous C button did end up being a communication button or a chat function, if you will. And finally, Nintendo is joining the party that they should have joined years ago, making online communication easy, not a challenge to try to talk to your friends and play games with your friends, having to use Discord and third-party apps. Now, you can still do so if you choose to, if you're used to that. But if you just want it simple and easy, you can also communicate directly through the console. And I know for a long time, Nintendo's stance was the reason they didn't want to allow chat functions on the console was to protect kids using those consoles from interacting with, bad characters online. But they also had to come to the realization that a bunch of adults are playing with their console, and they shouldn't have to jump through a bunch of hoops just to talk to their friends. And ultimately, I'm speaking as a father of 4 kids, and I really don't think everyone needs to suffer when the proper parental controls are available. And maybe lastly, to wrap up the good points, we won't have to wait too long. The launch of the console is June 5th, and I'm really glad Nintendo didn't announce this thing for the holiday season. I'm glad they went with a short run-up where we know what the thing is and we can pick it up very shortly. Let's jump into the bad. And you know what? We're going to start in the same place we started the good, the games. But on the bad side, we're going to be talking about the game pricing. Because yes, the prices of games are going up. Donkey Kong is going to be a minimum of $70 and Mario Kart is going to be a whopping $80, meaning that it's a $10 to $20 markup from the $60 price point that we had for most Nintendo Switch 1 games, with maybe only Tears of the Kingdom being released at $70 to my recollection. That is a big point of contention for a lot of people. Now, I get that a lot of people are disappointed about that. Personally, I'm disappointed as well. I wish everything was cheaper. However, I've got to say it's not coming to me as much of a surprise because, if a lot of other consoles have already been talking about raising their prices and Nintendo has tried it out with Tears of the Kingdom, the extra $10 didn't affect the sales. So you know what? They're probably ready to go with that $70 price point. Although I'm disappointed, I do have a mixed perspective on this because I grew up in the 90s. And in the 90s, if you don't know, for the SNES and Genesis, we were actually paying $90 games back in the day. Prices on games actually went down when the PS1 came out. The PS1 actually reset the market. So the fact that I would pay a $70 game today, although it's extremely disappointing, it's not really surprising because even those games back in the day, if you would have to adjust for inflation and all that, we're talking about more than $150. Like spending $90 in the 90s is like spending over $150 today. And probably someone has an inflation calculator and can get the actual math done, for that. But it's a crap ton of money. Now, that's not to defend Nintendo. It's just to give you a perspective that it's expensive, but things have actually already been worse in the past. And ultimately, the only thing that would maybe convince Nintendo, in my opinion, to not do this price change would be for sales to be affected. And unfortunately, I'm sort of a pragmatist. There is a hardcore audience, I think, that would be ready to possibly boycott Nintendo Switch games because you probably buy like 3, 4 games a month, mixed between first party and third party games and whatnot. However, the problem is that Nintendo has a very vast public that are more a casual gaming audience. And casual gamers maybe buy like 5 or 6 games a year, like on birthdays, a couple at Christmas, stuff like that. So to them, a $10 price hike is like $50 or $60 more a year. I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's just not enough for them to not buy the games. So I do think that unfortunately, unless people don't buy the games, that's going to become the new norm. And don't get me wrong, I want the Nintendo Switch 2 to be successful. I'm going to be buying the games. I have a Nintendo Switch channel. I have no choice. I need them for content. But if we're going to be honest, you can complain all you want online. Unless you talk with your wallet and not buy the games, the prices aren't going to change. Now, I know a lot of people also went crazy about the pricing of the console itself at $449 for the unit itself and then $499 for the bundle with the unit and Mario Kart. But I've got to say, personally, I wasn't really surprised by that price. If you've been watching the channel over the last couple of months, that was actually right in my prediction range. Because with everything that the Switch 2 was supposed to be packed with, if you weren't expecting it to be more expensive than the Switch 1, I really don't know what you were expecting. And look, I said it before, I wish everything was cheaper. But ultimately, the Switch 1, Nintendo was like making about $50 to $60 per console over the production cost. And the Switch 2 is a much more powerful unit with more features added onto it. It's guaranteed that the manufacturing cost was going to be at least an extra $100. So you tack on that Nintendo still needs to make that $40 to $50 for a profit. I mean, we were looking at a more expensive console. I'm sorry you guys are disappointed, but Nintendo never takes a loss leader strategy. They're not going to eat their profit to sell the console at a loss. But I still decided to include it in the bad section just because there was so much backlash over the price of the console. But we're not done talking about that. We're going to talk about it again in the weird section because if you've kept up with the news over the last few days, unfortunately, that might not even be the end of the story. But you know what actually got me really pissed off about the games? It's not the $10 price hike. It's the actual fact that we're going to have to pay for the upgrade packs for Nintendo Switch 1 games to the Nintendo Switch 2 versions. That I was very disappointed with. A more expensive console, I can deal with. Games going up by $10 on average, I'm not happy, but I mean, it is what it is. But Nintendo not wanting to buy a little bit of goodwill here and at least offer people who've already bought the Nintendo Switch 1 versions of games free upgrade packs, that was really what pushed me a little too far on the pricing side. Now, rumor has it that it's going to be about $20 per upgrade pack per game, which to me is just insane because that would make every Switch 1 game, if you bought it for $60, $80. If that's true, it's just unacceptable. The $10 would already be too much, but I mean, there's a world where I could live with that because we would be at the $70 price point like the average Nintendo Switch 2 game seems like it's going to be. But overall, I mean, I think they knew there was going to be backlash and they could have bought a ton of goodwill here and they just decided not to do it, which to me was the biggest mistake overall. Actually, you know what? I want to dive into the weird section here for a second, just because I don't want to come back to this later. But there's actually 2 upgrade packs that will be included for free if you have the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. And I'm going to call this weird because they could have mentioned this on the screen quickly in just a quick one-liner, but they decided not to, and I have no idea why. But if you look at on the Nintendo Switch website, and I'll put it up on the screen here, if you have the expansion pack, you do have the upgrade for Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild included with the expansion pack. So it doesn't make things better because they're still charging you for the other games, but it's super weird that they just didn't say that in the direct, which to me would have been a really awesome, like, little positive note. But overall, I really think that pricing was probably the biggest negative point overall that came out from this Switch 2 release announcement, or the, moments after. And yes, it was weird that they didn't include it at all during the direct itself. I think it was also just because regional pricing, flashing like 10 different prices per region would have been a weird thing, and they were trying to keep the directs pretty much uniform across all regions. But yeah, it was a weird choice overall as well. But we aren't done with the bad stuff yet, because there are 3 other points that I want to go over. These are going to be quicker. Number 1, game key cards. So if you go on the website, once again, it's mentioned that some games will be game key cards. What that means is that basically there won't really be anything on the cartridge itself. So this is regarding physical games. It's that the cartridge themselves will only be like an authentication key giving you access to downloading the game. You're still going to have to pop it in, and it's good to confirm that you are the owner of the game. And I'm really wondering how this is actually going to work out. My biggest question is this going to affect resale value of the games? Like, will you be able to resell these games to a totally different person with a different Nintendo account? Because to me, when I buy physical games, there's 2 reasons. Game preservation, and the fact that if I choose to sell one of my games, I want to have that option. Now, personally, I do think it will be sellable, but they didn't confirm that yet 100%, and it could turn out to be a bigger negative than it currently is. But I definitely did just want to point that out, that some physical games aren't really going to be physical games. Next, I want to talk about storage capacity, which for me was another bad point here. Now, they tried to hype it up, saying that there was so much more capacity than the original Switch and the Switch OLED with 256 gigabytes. But in today's world, I've just got to tell you, 256 gigabytes is really not enough. Especially considering that now we're going to be getting games like Cyberpunk and Elden Ring. Like, there's a very, very high probability, unless they're doing some compression magic, that those 2 games alone will almost fill up your 256 gigabytes. I just want to be clear. A lot of games are like 60, 80, 100 gigabytes on their own, meaning that 256 gigabytes for the big third-party games might mean that your console is filled after 2 or 3 games. Now, obviously, you're going to have to rotate like you probably already do if you have a PS5 or some of the other bigger consoles. It's just that, in my opinion, in today's world, 1 terabyte is almost like the minimum you need for a decent storage to have 5 or 6 big games installed and not have to spend half your time erasing and re-downloading games. Obviously, you can also buy a micro SD express card to expand that storage, but I do want to mention, for the moment, I already started shopping around, and at least here in Canada, they seem to be hard to find and pretty darn expensive. So if I was you and I was going to pick up a Nintendo Switch 2, I would jump on that as soon as possible, because prices are most likely going to go up, with the Nintendo Switch 2 probably being the primary console, increasing demand for those cards. Now, as the last point for the bad section, I have what's probably the scariest point for me, and that is the battery life of the Nintendo Switch 2, that they also did not address at all during the Direct. You actually have to go to the Nintendo Switch website and find the specs of the Switch 2. And basically, they're expecting that the Switch 2 will run from 2 to 6.5 hours, obviously depending on what type of game you're playing. So if you're playing a very demanding game, probably something like Cyberpunk or Elden Ring, you'll be closer to the 2-hour mark. If you're playing like a 2D action platformer, you're probably going to be way closer to the 6.5 hour mark. Now, if you're wondering if that's good or bad, let's take a look at what the Nintendo Switch 1 battery life was. And the Nintendo Switch 1, whether it was the base edition with the better battery when they did the refresh or the OLED, we were at 4.5 to 9 hours. And even compared to the Switch Lite was 3 hours to 7 hours. What that means is we're losing about 50% of battery life compared to the original Switch or the Switch OLED. And you're still losing about 30% battery life from the Switch Lite. And I think that that is going to be one of the biggest contention points when people actually get the real console in their hands. They're going to be realizing that this thing sucks a ton more power than the original Switch. And it's really funny that no one else is really talking about this, but ultimately, to me, that is one of the scariest bad points for the Nintendo Switch 2 launch so far. So now that we have the fear-mongering out of the way, let's jump into the weird section. Now, the weird section is mostly stuff that Nintendo is currently not talking about, and there's no real reason why they aren't. And the first among these things is nowhere in the specs can you see how much RAM the new console has. Random access memory, which is very important for gameplay, okay? It is one of the biggest things, in my opinion, that held the Switch 1 back from getting ports of a lot of good games and actually probably made it very hard for certain developers to port games over to the Switch. Now, rumor has it that the Switch 2 should have between 12 to 16 gigabytes of RAM, which in my opinion, is the bare minimum for a console like this. I know a lot of people were saying they would love it to have 32 gigabytes of RAM. Once again, I'm a pragmatist. I really don't see Nintendo doing this, especially since they only put 256 gigabytes of storage on the console. Going with that type of philosophy, I think they're going to be going with 12 or 16. I'd like to know what it is. I'm hoping for 16 because I just think it'll give us an extra bit of future proofing. But basically, they aren't saying it anywhere. And it's a little weird because they have to know that day one, as soon as people get this console in their hands, someone's pulling this thing apart and is going to tell us how much RAM is in there. So they might as well just say it. So it's just weird that they aren't. And this is just one of those big question marks for tech enthusiasts that can really get an idea of what the maximum capacity of this console is going to be. Now, along those same lines, they're really talking a lot about the fact that the new Joy-Cons have bigger and more comfortable joysticks. But nowhere are they confirming if they're Hall effect joysticks or the standard fare. And everyone knows that Joy-Con drift was a huge issue during the Switch 1. It got a lot of attention, and once again, Nintendo could have really made sure that everyone had a peace of mind and said that they were Hall effects. The fact that they're not is pointing to the fact that they might not be once again. And if they didn't do that, I'm really wondering why. But ultimately, once again, we're going to sort of get that answer on day one because someone's going to pull them apart and tell us exactly what kind of sensors are in there. It's just weird that they're not doing it themselves. And the fact that they're not is not only weird, but like I said, it's pointing to the fact that it's most likely, once again, standard Joy-Cons, meaning that drift might become an issue once again. I don't want to scare anyone. I put this in the weird section because it is really uncertain. Next, in the weird section, I do want to mention that Japan is actually getting 2 Switches. One Switch is going to be almost $100 cheaper than the other one. And the reason why is that one of those 2 Switches is actually going to be language locked. You can only play games in Japanese, and the console itself will only be in Japanese. Now, the reason why I put this in the weird section is also as a public service announcement, because I am guaranteed that some resellers are going to try to pick these Switches up in Japan on the cheap and sell them back to other regions, not being that upfront about the fact that you can't play games in English or any other language on those consoles. So just keep an eye out. If you, for some odd reason, you have a really cheaply priced Switch for the market price and it's coming from Japan, I personally, for the moment, would stay away because you might be getting one of those Japanese-only Switches. I included this in the weird section because it really didn't fit into good or bad, but it's not that weird. It's actually because Nintendo's probably trying to protect their whole market. Since the yen right now is really, really weak, they wanted to make sure that a bunch of foreigners didn't just buy up all the Japanese Switches, and that basically there would be none left for the Japanese market after that. So by doing this like Japanese only console, they pretty much make sure that, their home audience can get a console. But our last and biggest point for the weird section is what happened on Thursday, Friday. Basically, pre-orders in the US are delayed. Currently, we don't know when you'll be able to pre-order a Nintendo Switch 2 because the price that was announced in the US apparently did not take into account the global situation. We'll call it that, okay? But I think we all know what it is. And currently, unfortunately, the price that people were already finding too expensive might be going up further because they hadn't adjusted to that global situation. Now, I do think Nintendo is waiting it out just in case things sort of fluctuate back and forth because, as we know, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride on that end. But it's really weird because one of the biggest gaming markets currently doesn't have a confirmed pre-order date. But I'm really wondering how that's going to shape up. And it's really put us in a absolutely weird situation for this launch where I think Nintendo they have to be in crisis mode. They have to be in like, how can we get this console to US customers and not charge them like $600-700 for a Switch 2. So there we have it. That was the good, the bad, and the weird for the Nintendo Switch 2 launch, at least as it stands right now. So now let me know in the comments down below. Are you going to be picking up a Switch 2? Are you maybe going to be waiting a little bit? Are you even going to maybe skip it altogether? Let me know. And don't forget, on the way out, to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and click on that notification bell so you know when all my future content comes out. And as usual, I hope I'll see you in my next video.